Ladies and gentlemen, this is Verity Seeker, and I'm your host, Mark Powls. My guest today is Olivia Hayse, Libertarian candidate for Kansas Senate District 30. And welcome to the show, Olivia.
Hi there. Yes, Olivia Hayse, Libertarian over in District 30. So I'm just like south of Wichita, pretty much.
Why are you running with the Libertarian Party?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'm running as a libertarian. We'll back up a little bit. I've been a libertarian since 2016, and I've been involved pretty heavily with the state party on and off with different positions and represented Kansas at national convention since 2020. So pretty involved. In the movement and well versed in our principles and everything. So yeah, I am running as a libertarian specifically right now because I have watched as momentum around my party has grown, especially in Sedgwick County. We have the highest ranking elected libertarian in the country right now. Lily Wu is the mayor of Wichita. Now,
Oh, wow.
how libertarian she really is remains to be seen, but I've met with her and I've spoken with her, and because of her campaign alone, we've seen a lot of people that are changing their idea of what a libertarian looks like. And myself and some other activists that I work with in the area, we are out there at meetings and showing people, we're not the guy with the boot on our head, we're not vermin, God love him. We're a little bit different. And so we're really changing that stereotype. And I've seen people are hungry for a change. We have had a Republican supermajority since 93. And so with that, that means that there are a lot of marginalized groups that have gone underrepresented for a very long time. And so when you put all those together and you're also a viable third party option, it kind of just seems like the right time, really.
Okay. Yeah, well, okay, we have two factions basically running the entire election apparatus. And you hear both the Democrat and the Republican Party. By the way, I'm really hard on the Republican Party. I'm still a registered Republican. Okay, so we have these two-party factions. They control the entire election apparatus, but yet they complain about the
Mm-hmm.
fraud and all the other shenanigans that go on. Okay, and you mentioned that the Republican Party has the handle on the so-called majority, which is
Right.
really mobocracy representation. But these two parties are in control of the entire apparatus. Okay, you're a libertarian, and I know how hard it is for independents to even get on the ballot. You guys have to jump through so many hoops just to be recognized because you have the uniparty monopoly on the entire system. What's your viewpoint on that?
Yeah, so I mean, as far as like ballot access, we are the longest running established third party in the state of Kansas. So like
Right.
our ballot access is pretty secure. It's usually based on how well we do. So depending how well we do in November, we're pretty secure. So like for instance, independents have to go through like signature gathering and stuff like that. I didn't have to do any of that. My party is able to go. Our state convention is considered our primary, and then our party leaderships goes and files all of our candidates at once. So there's some things that that are easier for us being a third party that's easier than independent, but then there's other things like I'm most likely not going to be able to get the Republican and Democrat in my race. They're not going to debate me. They're not going to have a forum with me. I mean, I worked on our governor's campaign a couple years ago, and we had news stations that were told that Schmidt and Kelly would not show up if they were going to let him be there. So
Right.
that's the type of thing, and why I'm so grateful to alternate media and to you, because any opportunity to just share how my platform is a little bit different and my party is a little bit different, I am open to, and I would welcome the opportunity to stand next to the other two candidates and just show there like you said, there are things that I can agree with both Republicans and Democrats about, and there are things that I will criticize evenly, both sides. And so I really plan to use that as a force if I'm able to win this election and serve in Topeka. I would like to use that as a force to get the parties to come together a little more. It seems like we're so busy playing, like we've made it a sports game, this team or
Yeah.
that team, and
Yeah.
very little collaboration and creativity is happening in the middle. So I'd love to get in there and just shake that up and break up that gridlock and see if we can be a little bit more effective.
Wow, great answer. Okay, if elected, how important is it for you, you have to swear an oath to a written document which limits the government,
Right.
which is actually a protection for everyone, no matter what your choices in life are. And you and I both know that, you know, there are groups that are being threatened on every corner side. You know, if you're a taxpayer, you're being hit hard too, because of government not following a written constitution to limit itself and to protect the people. I mean, they have 20 listed items that must be protected in the Bill of Rights in the state of Kansas, and yet they violate so many of those every single day. And I don't think our elected representatives ever read that document. They read statutes or procedural guidelines that have nothing to do with their primary job, I should say. So much of that's not pursuant to what's actually written in there. How important is it to you, if you're elected to represent your district, to follow that constitution strictly when you're making decisions?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think it's important, but I think that ultimately, if I'm elected, my job in Topeka will be to represent the wishes and the concerns of the people that put me in office. I think that so many, long-term politicians have kind of lost connection with what it's like to be an everyday citizen, and they're only thinking in terms of policies and bills, and like you said, they're not reading the Constitution, they're not reading the bills, and they've just lost that connection. And so my ultimate goal would be to stay very connected to the wishes of the people that put me there. But also, this is where, as a libertarian, we have, our own guiding principles about limited government. And for example, the non-aggression principle is very big to us. We have principles that are very consistent, and it's one of the reasons I like libertarianism, is because we don't allow for a lot of carving out exceptions here and there. We're pretty consistent with our beliefs, and so those would continue to be my driving factors, and they exist outside of a constitution or anything like that. They exist. They're able to exist neutral of that.
Okay. Yeah. Now I'm going to go right into taxes, because that's got everybody angry right now,
Yeah.
with the appraisals. I mean, they're going crazy with the appraisal process. We knew they were going to do it in 2020 because there were going to be shortfalls. And of course, there's kind of an agenda out there to steal people off of their property, or force people off their property because they want to own it and control it. I'm going to read directly from the Kansas Constitution, which, you would swear an oath to obey it. But this really deals with a problem, an issue that you've talked about a lot, and a lot of people have talked about. You have Republicans trying to wiggle around this whole taxing appraisal issue and come up with bills that are supposed to remedy the problem for everyone, but yet they somehow have not read, the very first thing that's written in our Constitution. So I'm going to read it for you and the public here, and just kind of see what you think about it. Okay, the Kansas Constitution, the first thing on there is the ordinance when Kansas was chartered. Okay, this has never changed. The second paragraph in the ordinance, quote, whereas the state of Kansas as a government will, you might as well put shall in there, but will possess the right to tax said lands. And of course, there's a description of all the land that's within the borders of Kansas for the purpose of government. In other words, if it's not written in the Constitution, if it's not written in the ordinance, they can't do it. So that should be the basis for their taxation. And of course, that should not be enormous either, because that's an abuse of, that would be our Declaration 1, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is property, the ownership of property in its many forms, as I've seen on your websites and some of your talks, in its many forms. My question is, Article 11 in the Kansas Constitution is the description, the procedural description of how, when, why, and what they're going to tax in order to fund government. take it from here, Olivia. What do you think about that? Is it that
Yeah.
simple?
Gosh, I think it could have been that simple, but I think we've gotten ourselves to a position where it's not. So I'll just clarify for everybody. Yes, you're going to run into libertarians that, taxation is theft and, no tax and all that stuff. I agree with a lot of that, but I'm also very realistic in where I know that we can't just overnight get rid of all taxes, right? So I understand that taxes have their place, but I still believe that we should be being taxed as little as possible. And if we are going to continue taxing our citizens, every cent of that tax money, we should know where it's going. It should be a way more transparent process than it is. We should be able to easily track it. And government should be, if they're going to continue taxing us, there's a lot of things that we need to look at that could kind of be thrown out. There's a lot of things that we don't need to be taxing, and a lot of things that we're doing that are inefficient. And so yeah, so I like I said, I'm okay with some of it, but only under the premise that we are running ourselves as transparently and as efficiently as possible. I joked with someone the other day, it should be a one in, one out. If you're going to add a tax on something, well, then they should take away a tax on something. There should be there should be some guardrails on how much we can do. And I think there's some creative solutions too. I don't mind like the taxes on vices and stuff. There was a petition that went around earlier this year in Wichita specifically about cannabis and using taxes from cannabis specifically for our homeless efforts. And that's something that could be explored. That's a potential good solution, but again, only if we're getting rid of some other unnecessary taxes to allow for that. And some unnecessary, I mean, we just are giving like I think $25 million or something to Exploration Place, which is a children's museum, and it's awesome, and I'm a member and I love going there, but that could have probably been privately funded. It didn't necessarily need to be funded with tax dollars. And I mean, I know the whole star bond issue, stadium issue. Oh my gosh, we're issuing tax breaks in the complete wrong places. It's not stadium owners and developers that need those breaks. It's everyday citizens. So yeah, it needs to be reined in for sure.
Yeah. Don't you think that's why we have 501c3s?
Yeah, you would think, but again, only if they're being properly used and not abused, right?
and most of the time they're abused. I
Yeah.
agree with that. And we have so many in my area here. We probably have more successful 501c3 nonprofits operating than we do businesses.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, I owned and managed, actually designed and built a coffee house restaurant here in downtown Garnett.
Cool.
And our biggest competition were the 501c3s because how do they raise money? With food. And of course, we had some other nonprofits that were operating, and they get subsidized too. They don't have to pay sales tax, and their property is not taxed and all that. So my feeling is this nonprofit should do some of that work, and that was the purpose of having the nonprofits exist. And I agree with everything you said there. And let's go on to the next question.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm going to get into the spiritual realm here.
Okay.
And I'm aware that you consider yourself a Christian or a Christ follower, however you want to put that. And I'm going to read the preamble of the Constitution, because I don't think anybody reads it. And with Verity Seeker, I want to point these things out so they're not ever forgotten, because we get into so many arguments over things and with government, and we have a document there, so I'm going to read that preamble. This is the second most important in our Constitution because it comes second, right after the ordinance. It says, quote, "We, the people of Kansas, grateful to Almighty God for our civil and religious privileges in order to ensure the full enjoyment of our rights as American citizens." It actually should be state citizens too. "To ordain and establish this Constitution of the state of Kansas, which the following boundaries to wit," which, they describe the boundaries and so on and so forth. And my question is, so is it unlawful or unconstitutional to speak openly, to pray openly in public places, And I'm getting to a point here because, yeah, there is a clash between religions, really, and agnostics and, so on and so forth. Or to have a monument like the Ten Commandments, those have been pulled out with words about God in public places or publicly funded property. Or for a church to stay open in spite of government mandates ordering a church to close due to something they've deemed an emergency. So I hit on many points there.
Yep.
And Olivia Hayse, as a Kansas senator, potentially representing District 30, I mean, they mentioned God in the Constitution. How do we handle this?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And I think it's really well timed. And I think that ultimately it really comes down to two issues. It's a twofold answer for me. So first and foremost, private citizens and private businesses, in this case, churches, they absolutely have a right to manage and organize and run themselves the way that they see fit. So if a private citizen wants to worship or pray or do some kind of motion that is observing their religion in public, I have no problems with that. They are private citizens. They have every right to do so. Same thing with churches. If churches feel like they feel safe and they feel confident enough to stay open during a pandemic, I don't think the government should have told them not to do that. It's ultimately up to them to decide to do that. Now, all of that being said, there's a difference between a private citizen and a public funded situation. I believe that our government, now this would unfortunately include our schools because they are government funded schools, our government should be religiously neutral. Our government exists to have a right to worship or a right to not worship, right? Or a right to worship differently. I know what kind of religion I believe in and what kind of religion and afterlife I'm comfortable with, but that's not for everybody, And so, yeah, I believe that we should really be working our way towards a true separation of church and state and a true separation of church and education, because once you keep the two separate, a lot of these issues you don't run into. Right. A lot of these issues, if we would have just stayed consistent with the principle that we originally put in place, we could have avoided a lot of these things.
Yeah, and if people now see, I agree with you. I'm a Christian too, a Christ follower, and not perfect, of course,
right.
But I feel like living by example is what we should focus on rather than worrying about whether we have prayer in school or whether we're worshiping a flag or whatever. Now I said worshiping,
right?
But anyway, these things are not important, and having the neutral territory in our public schools protects everyone. And so
and
your
Oh,
spirituality is yours.
Yeah, and another reason I'm really passionate about keeping certain places neutral is because I actually have a lot of friends as an adult who had trauma in churches growing up, and sometimes our way of trying to welcome them back in by having that symbol or even going to vote at a church. I have friends where that is triggering for them because of what they went through. And I know that, that is a small percentage, but it's a very real thing. And I'm really big on maintaining neutral places, just because that's the whole other flip side of it that I think no one is considering and talking about.
Okay. All right. Now we're going to get into a really hot topic here, a really touchy one, and I know you're going to have a great answer for it. Okay. Is it an unalienable right for a mother to abort the life of a baby in her womb in Kansas for convenience? I was very specific about the wording.
Yeah, I know the wording it definitely caught my eye, the wording for sure. But okay, so we could literally have a whole show on this topic, right?
Yeah.
We could. And so I'm gonna try very hard not to do that, but I will just say that This is so complex of an issue, whether you're talking about it as a legislator or even if you're someone that's walking through it and having to make this decision. It is so complex. And the last thing that anybody needs when we're looking at this issue, the last thing we need is for a politician to be a voice in our head or a factor in that. I think that it's a medical freedom issue, regardless of how you feel about this specific procedure. Like I said, I'm very consistent. So whether we're talking about a vaccine, a mask, or this medical procedure in particular, I think that it is between the patient and the doctor. And just like the government should not be in our schools and should not be in our churches, the government should also not be in our doctor's offices.
Okay.
I tried to be succinct on that one.
According to Article 2, which is legislative, I'm not focused on the federal government when I'm talking about constitutions, because we paid way too much attention to that thing. Yeah. That's another jurisdiction. So Article 2, which deals with the legislative branch, which would be you and the House, and Article 3, which deals with the judicial branch of our government here in the state of Kansas. Okay. Which branch of the Kansas government has the power to create laws pursuant to said constitution? Is it the judicial branch or is it you, the legislative branch?
Good. Yeah, this is a good question. And it's got me thinking about basic concepts I haven't thought of in a long time. I was like about to go look up Schoolhouse Rock as I was preparing.
No, don't watch that. It's got some problems too.
No, I know. But ultimately, the way that I see it is the legislative branch is the ones that are actually creating and making the laws, and the judicial branch, it's their job to kind of interpret those laws. And I think that really both branches, so everybody involved, whether it's your judges all the way up to your senators and even the governor, what we need to keep our eyes focused on is the fact that we're making decisions that are going to affect every single Kansan, and we need to consider every single Kansan that comes from different party, different religious backgrounds. We need to consider all of them when we're making these decisions. And we also need to really make sure that, again, kind of the more limited government approach, we need to make sure that when we're writing these laws and interpreting these laws, that we're really focused on, just like you said, life, liberty, and property, that we're focusing on just those laws, and everything else we need to be asking ourselves, do we need to be involved in these other issues?
Okay. Yeah. And the reason why I asked that question is because a lot of times you as a senator and the House representatives, they'll appropriate money for schools.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's a lot of things in the schools that simply need to be cut as far as requiring the taxpayer to fund it because it's simply unconstitutional. But then the judicial branch steps in and says, oh, you're behaving unconstitutionally, and they make up some lie about it, and the legislative branch buckles.
Yeah.
And they bring in their lawyers, attorneys, and they get scared and they just quit. They don't back up their constitutionality. They don't say, well, here it is in Article such and such. By the way, here it is in the Bill of Rights. We are creating laws pursuant to this Constitution. So what's your point of view on this?
Right.
You're not going to tell us what to do. And that's what I would like to see, because all of you, there's more of you, you represent all of Kansas, whereas the judicial branch is few.
Yeah.
And I've read Article 2, and they have no power over the legislature.
Yeah. And I think so many politicians, both state and nationally, there's this whole concept that like you have to be a lawyer or understand the law and the ins and outs. And that's quite frankly not true. That is the judicial wing's job, is to interpret and make the, square peg, round hole, make it fit. But it's both of their jobs to make sure that we're doing it in a way that is not aggressing against citizens and is not taking away their freedoms unnecessarily. And so that's the challenge. And that's kind of the more collaborative. I would like to see us collaborate more on those issues.
Yeah. And I'd like to see the judicial branch, interpret but advise, rather than
Yes.
say we're gonna perform a negative on the legislative branch.
Yes.
There's a lot of people in the legislative branch, and I don't think the court should have the authority to override them. So, sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong.
Right.
And but you guys, those of you serving as representatives, really are the ones.
Yep.
Okay. Concerning education, since we're going to segue into education, in Article 6, Section 1, the legislature shall, that's a pretty strong word,
Yeah.
provide for intellectual, educational, vocational, and scientific improvement by establishing and maintaining public schools, educational institutions, and related activities to those things that they listed. Not any activity,
Hmm.
those specific things as described. So is it a constitutional violation for elected representatives to continue allowing the appropriations of taxpayer revenues to fund athletics? And now I'm not against athletics, or those things associated with that. But when I read the Constitution and I see the amount of money that's going to organized activities that are outside of educational, vocational, scientific, and intellectual, and the supplemental salaries that go along with it, it doesn't seem to me like a huge part of the appropriations coming out of the legislator should be funding these unconstitutional organized activities, which would also cut the cost of how much tax revenue they need from you and me, especially I mean, they're stealing it from our personal, this is our personal property that they're taxing.
Yeah.
And I think it should be funded through not a tuition, because we're not allowed to charge a tuition in public schools, but these would be tuition, or not tuition, but enrollment fees. If you're going to participate, you pay the enrollment fee. Now, this is what homeschoolers and private schools have to deal with. They're like in the private sector, and they have to survive on their outcomes.
Yeah.
But our public schools are almost free. I'm telling you, almost free. And so much of our tax money goes to these unconstitutional budgets. I guarantee it, because I taught school for a
Yeah.
long time, both public and private.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned homeschool, because as a homeschooler, not only am I being stolen from, not only am I being taxed, but it's going to a service that I do not use and cannot use. Now, there's been some recent legislations that have changed where if there's certain services that if I need to, I can technically go get. But before that most recent bill, it was up to the superintendent of each district. And I was not in a district that was going to allow my kid to play in said sports or plays or forensics or whatever. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's something that gets me going. But yeah, listen, a government school's top priority, their top priority, I would even venture so much as to say their only priority as far as my tax money should be education. And it
You
is
hit it.
very easy to see if a school is prioritizing education. If you are in a school district that has a new stadium, but a 20% graduation rate or a super low ACT rate, this is all available. This is all available for you to get from your school district or from the state. If you have a new stadium, but you cannot graduate students in a way that they can take on college, then your priorities are messed up in your school district, and you need to be going to your school board and you need to be holding them accountable. You need to be asking them to do something differently. There's a lot of things that we can let go of. I remember when, I was always a dancer for like dance team and stuff, and we didn't get, this was back in Texas where football reigned supreme. We didn't get any of that money. We shouldn't have gotten it anyways, but we had to privately fundraise for our uniforms, for our competitions, for our buses. We had to go to churches and ask them to let us use their vans just to get to competitions. Booster clubs used to be a thing, and they can and will carry on. If you don't give stadiums subsidies, if you don't give museums subsidies, if you don't give football team subsidies, they will survive. They will figure it out. You need to refocus, and you need to look at your school district and see what they're focusing on. And like you and I have both said, their top education, their top priority, maybe even their only priority, honestly, should be educating your children, and everything else comes second.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just want to be clear, at least on Verity Seeker here, and you may not agree. I don't know if you will or not, but uh, the fine arts
Hmm.
uh, and uh, physical education have to be in the curriculum as part of the educational process. It's those things that go beyond
Right. Yeah.
those primary things,
Right.
which would include, uh, something like dance. You have
Hmm.
fine visual arts that's part of
Right.
that, but there's some of that that trickles outside that
Yeah.
becomes an organized activity like athletics.
Yeah. And when we're
And
spending more on
yeah,
football uniforms than we are on curriculum, or
and
there's
and
a
the,
school, there's a school in my district that is having an issue with heating and cooling their building. Their buildings are super old, but they're already saddled with a bond issue for another. I don't want to give it away, but for
yeah,
another tourist attraction in their town, they're saddled under that debt. They're afraid to speak up. They're
yeah,
coming to me behind the scenes asking if there is any state or federal help that we can get that would help. I mean, how can a student learn in a freezing cold classroom in winter in Kansas? They can't.
yeah.
And so it's just like these are the things that actually would directly relate to student success. And I think that your like you said, your fine arts and your sports and even your more vocational things, they have a place in the school building, in the classroom, but where can we focus it in outside of that?
Yeah. Yeah. And if it serves the general welfare of all the students, like
Right.
PE and health,
Yeah.
that's where you get your physical education. It's not through football, it's not through basketball
Yeah, yeah.
or
And
what.
it's you make a great point too. I mean, some of those extracurriculars are expensive to partake in, and not every student, has transportation to practice after school. Not every student can afford, two new uniforms every year. Like not so they're not really the place where children can be represented equitably.
Yeah.
So when you keep the focus on the student and on the
Hmm.
classroom, then you have a better chance of keeping your priorities in line.
That is right. Okay, in a true federal republic, that's what I call the entire system.
Mm,
And of course the state has to have a constitutional republic, has to function, and then the US general government has to have a constitution, so it's a constitutional republic. So that's a requirement of the whole system. The relationship between the states, which are sovereign, and this special government is a federal republic. Um, what in your mind, since you could be a state senator, what would be the proper role or the proper relationship between the U.S. general government, which is, there, and your state? Can you kind of just give an
yeah.
overview of that?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I don't get asked it a lot outside of libertarian circles because in libertarian circles, we talk about states' rights a lot. And I feel like we have a pretty good understanding of it. But outside of that, I don't feel like your more mainstream audiences, this isn't a question I would get on some of those. So I really enjoyed this question. Okay, so the government that we have right now is what I consider to be like a top-down government. You have Washington telling states what to do. You have Topeka telling cities like Derby, Mulvane, Wichita what to do. And that's what we're used to, but it's backwards. That's not the way that I believe that it should be run. I believe government should actually be run from the bottom up. I believe that your local municipalities, your cities and your counties, they should actually have the most say in the rules and regulations that are overseeing their people because they know their needs, or should, if they're paying attention to their constituents. Ideally, your local leaders should be more in tune with what your local constituents need. So yeah, it kind of needs to be flipped on its axis a little bit, and furthermore, your higher branches should really only be existing to keep your lower branches in check. If you have an issue locally, then you should be able to go up the ladder. But like I said, it's what we see a lot of the times now is backwards. We actually see our higher branches of government violating the rights of our lower branches of government and our citizens versus the way that I think it was originally designed to be. We've kind of as a whole abused it. So I'd love to return us back to more powerful local governments and less powerful state and national governments.
Thomas Jefferson would love you.
Awesome. I think.
Yeah, I like that guy. Article 12, we're talking about our state constitution. I believe it's Article 12, Section 4 deals with eminent domain, which you have talked about before. Okay. Quote, no right of way shall be appropriated to the use of any corporation until full compensation therefore be first made in money or secured by deposit of money to the owner, irrespective of any benefit from any improvement proposed by such corporation. Does that protect the owner, the property owner, in your opinion? Or
No,
it's a little weak, isn't it?
Yeah, personally, okay, so on the campaign trail, I talk about the non-aggression principle a lot, which is the idea of under no circumstance aggressing against another person or their property. So on the national scale, we'll use this principle to talk about, being very pro-peace, anti-war, that type of thing. But locally, I talk about how look for examples where the government is aggressing against its citizens. And this is an example that I use of aggression. It's happening in Derby. I just saw today there was a case that I had spoken out against. And not only did they come to terms, which under threat of force, they've taken this property, but now they're immediately filing for another eminent domain on another improvement case, some like water line they want to put in. And so in my opinion, as a libertarian, property rights and aggression, those two things, I mean, they set us off, right? They get us going. They're very important to us. And I just consider eminent domain to be one of the most egregious forms of aggression that a government can take. We talk about taxation being theft. Eminent domain is literally theft. They're literally taking your property from you because they know what to do with it better. And if I'm able to be a senator, really, no matter whether I have a title or not, this will be an issue that I will continue to speak out against. I don't think it's appropriate under any circumstance for the government to be able to seize your property from you.
Okay, good answer. If you're elected and there are other senators who agree with you, do you think it's possible to get enough support in the House and the Senate to amend Article 12? So Article 12 needs to be more pursuant to Declaration 1 of our Bill of Rights, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, when they're stealing your property in any of its very varied forms, in this case, it'd be your house, your land,
your
everything.
business. Yeah.
If they're not protecting that right. So Article 12 seems a little bit lacking, in my opinion, just like Article 11 is in conflict with the ordinance in our state. They're taxing everything. Well, Article 12 is also in conflict with Declaration 1 of the Bill of Rights in a big way because it's just not clear enough.
Yeah, I would almost, to your question, I would love to have conversations with other people and see where they land. If there is some improvements we can make to Article 12, that I'd be all for it. I would also not be opposed to just saying, let's get rid of it. Let's be a state that's not going to allow us to even have a path. If you really go down the rabbit hole and you look at eminent domain and some of its most famous earliest cases, it was never done with pure intentions. It was never truly done to benefit all. It was done to target a few. And so I would not be opposed, but again, knowing that I will probably have to come to a compromise, I would not be opposed to getting rid of it altogether. But if we need to come to some verbiage that protects citizens a little more, I'd be open to that conversation as well.
Okay. All right. Is it the Kansas government's business or the U.S. general government's business to tell you what you can plant, grow, dry, or smoke in your backyard? For example, marijuana, medical, or recreational. I don't care. Is it their business?
Oh my gosh, absolutely not. If you, and going back to a libertarian principle, if you are not hurting anybody else, and you are not stealing anybody else's property or damaging anybody else's property, if all you're doing is just yourself partaking in something, They've got no business telling you what you can do, what you can grow, what you can consume. I've been a big advocate for cannabis rights, and I'm on the Kansas Cannabis Coalition. Whether recreational or medicinal, it has applications for both, and that will be one of the first things that I will work towards if elected next year, is finally legalizing some form of cannabis for this. But I mean psilocybin, and I think there are other plant medicines that go along with this, that at this point, because we are so far behind, we probably need to just look at legalizing a handful. I know it will be tough. It's been an uphill battle just with cannabis for the last 2 states to still not have cannabis. But yeah, at the end of the day, it is no one's business, whether we're talking about a plant or anything else that we've talked about today. It's no one's business what I do on my property to my body.
Yeah, and basically, government was never supposed to legislate morality
Right.
or anything else on your private premises. And,
Absolutely.
there's things I don't agree with, but what they do in the privacy of their home, inside their fence, whatever, as long as they're not infringing upon another to the same right, which actually is in our Declaration 1, the
Right.
right to life, liberty, the free exercise of your liberty, as long as you're not imposing or infringing on the right of others to the same. And I've heard you
Yeah.
say that, or I read it someplace.
Yeah.
You're
We've
right on.
gotten so far into, like you said, legislating morality and also legislating pre-crime. There are so many things that here in Wichita, we're seeing them pass on the city level that are because a crime might be the next thing that happens. But it's not happening yet, but we're going to go ahead and make this pre-crime illegal. And that's just, we've way overstepped in so many areas.
So even if we disagree with what other people are doing, we're not going to be the Puritans
Right.
of our current modern day. We need to accept the good with the bad.
Yes. Yeah.
So
And it comes with risk. We always talk about freedom. Freedom is going to come with risks. That's absolutely correct.
right.
But just from a Christian perspective, I mean, there's no better example of someone giving us free will than in Christianity. If whatever God you believe in wanted to make it to where we had to follow him, he probably could, depending on how powerful you believe him to be, but he doesn't. He wants us to choose. And again, like you said, leading by example is the best way we can do that.
Wow, I am so glad God is not like our government.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Now let's talk more about you now. We're going to get out of the constitutional stuff. Okay. Tell us about your podcast. I was not aware of that, and I just learned this recently. Is it the Mama
The Mama
Marketer
Marketer.
podcast?
Mama
Mama?
Marketer.
I'm a Southerner.
I would
Yeah,
probably answer to that.
Okay, yeah. About that podcast, why'd you do this? What's this
Yeah.
one all about?
Okay, so I didn't get to say it earlier, but my background is in digital marketing. So I've always been a content creator, whether it was for myself or for a client. I've always been in this realm, kind of. And so, like on Instagram and Twitter and everything, my name is the Mama Marketer. And what that comes from is because I didn't want to have a place where I had to separate. This is where I'm going to talk marketing tips, and this is where I'm going to talk, mom life, homeschool life, that type of thing. I kept it all together. And especially on Instagram, I kept it all together in that feed. And that became where I got my most supporters and my most followers, because like I said, people are multi-dimensional. They have varied interests. And so that became the place that more people resonated with me. And so that's where the name Mama Marketer comes from, is it's going to be part momming stuff. It's going to be part marketing stuff. And now we're throwing in political stuff too. And it's just, I don't believe in the experts that I can't tell you how many times people have told me, pick a niche, pick a lane, pick an area of expertise. No, humans are not like that. And so that's where the name comes from. And the podcast started. So I've always blogged. I've always, I have a book, which we'll talk about, but I've always been good with the written word and short form, long form. And then the podcast came out during COVID. I did an Instagram live show every Friday. It was called Friday Friends Day. And I would just pick another random friend and be like, do you want to come talk with me live on Instagram on Friday? It was kind of to mark the time, because it was really hard to mark time during COVID. And it was also just, it would give us an excuse to put makeup on and look cute and talk to a human outside of our house. And it was a lot of fun. And then from there, I was getting offers from podcasting channels and studios and stuff wanting to do that. And I was like, I could probably figure this out on my own. Probably don't need to pay someone to do that. So I just did it myself. And yeah, we talk, the last few episodes have been very much internal libertarian business because I just came out of both state and national convention. But I talk everything from politics to entrepreneurship to pop culture to Bible studies. It's kind of just whatever I feel needs to be talked about or whatever the moment allows for. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Wow. So you took a bad situation and made something great out of it.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. You had mentioned the book. Okay. You recently authored a book. I don't know exactly the date when that came out. It's called Crooked Paths Straight: How I Learned to Trust God's Design for My Life by Olivia Hayse. Tell us about that. What the heck? I haven't read it.
Okay. You can get it on Amazon. You can also get it at Watermark Books in Wichita. They have signed copies available and they'll ship to you. So just putting that out there. Yeah, so I set out, the book came out last year. It's been out almost, we might be coming up on the year mark. We might have just passed the year mark. And it took me a few years to write. I set out wanting to write the story about my family immigrating here legally from Mexico in the 1960s. They went through such care to do it above board. It cost my grandparents every cent they had and their entire lives practically to finish up their citizenship and do it above board. And same with a lot of my aunts and uncles. And so I just felt like the story of people coming here legally is not told enough. And so I set out to find out, why did they do it the hard way? Why did they do it? Even going through that tough process, I still have aunts and uncles and cousins that were prejudiced against and were, people just assumed they were here illegally. And it just, I don't know, I just really wanted to dive in. And I spent years of my life interviewing the women in my family, the men in my family that were there in the 60s when they were slowly, couple by couple, child by child, immigrating here. And so I set out to tell that story. But when it was all said and done, that was really only a couple chapters. And so obviously that wasn't long enough for a book. So then I continued to tell the story of my life. I had a kid at 18 years old. I had a lot of factors working against me. And so basically it's the story of how I tried really hard to mess up my life. And how I was able to redeem it by coming back to church and being close with the Lord. And then I talk about kind of at the end of it about how much easier life is when instead of messing it up and waiting for him to help me correct it, I go to him first with, where should I be going and staying in prayer. And I kind of end with like a little mini Bible study. And I give tips on farming and homeschooling and all those type of things. I kind of end with that. So yeah, it has been a labor of love and it's been awesome. I didn't expect to be on bookstores. I thought maybe my family would read it, but I get people asking every day. I get a request for the audiobook. I get people asking for it in Spanish, which I really should have known about that. So those are my big projects outside of my Senate race this year is working on getting those other versions of it out. And everybody, the first question I always get is, what's your second book? And that used to be a painful question. I used to be like, oh my gosh, I just spent years getting this one out and you want me to write another one. But I would very much like to write another one and it will be a little bit more political. Then there's some concepts floating around, but we're not there yet. So, but we're moving in that direction. So.
Wow. Okay. Well, congratulations on that. It's been close to a year.
Yep.
And I didn't know anything about it. But it sounds like it'd be a good book for a daughter.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Anyone just trying to figure it out, especially I think I say it in my little dedication, like anyone who feels like they need direction or feels like maybe they're going a direction they don't want to be anymore and they're not exactly sure how to undo it, we can work through that for sure.